අද්විතීය 200 Mbps ස්පීඩ් එකකින් ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ වේගවත්ම සහ පුළුල්තම හෝම් බ්‍රෝඩ්බෑන්ඩ් සම්බන්ධතාවය වන SLT මොබිටෙල් දේශීය ෆයිබර් බලවේගය ඔබත් අදම අත්විඳින්න.
හරිම සුළුයි.
Tonight on First at 9, this Saturday the 3rd of June 2023. The only way out. Sri Lanka will only be able to overcome the crisis after completing debt talks, says the President. Highlights that none of the political parties have at least 50% voter base and so all parties should unite for the country. Downward adjustment. With the appreciation of the rupee, Litrogas says a price reduction of at least 300 rupees possible at tomorrow's revision. Unnecessary panic. Power and Energy Minister assures of sufficient fuel stocks as CPC and Lanka IOC continue to distribute fuel island-wide.
Alliance Finance මෙතුරු රන්නයි සේවාවෙන් රන් පවුම්කට රුපියල් 1,70,000ක ඉහළ අධිකාරමක්.
ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දෙනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබාගත හැක.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9 with Ndivadi Amuata. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
And a warm welcome. You're joining us tonight on your prime time English news service on AdaDerana 24, and we take you straight to your top story. President Ranil Wickremesinghe says Sri Lanka will only be able to come out of the economic crisis once the debt restructuring talks are completed. Addressing the National Law Conference today, the head of state pointed out that it must be ensured that the country's economy is on a growth path.
The National Law Conference 2023-2024 commenced in New Delhi this morning under the patronage of President Ranil Wickremesinghe.
If we are to prosper as a nation, it is important that the legal sector recognizes the importance of entrepreneurship and the entrepreneurs, and the entrepreneurs recognizes the importance of the rule of law. In this regard, it is vital that the political leadership is also included to give ear to the conversation.
If you look at the political situation today, it's unheard of. President with one member in parliament, running with a parliament which is working together, and there are many members who are crossbenchers. But nevertheless, what is dangerous to me is that this is a parliament which hasn't got political parties with the political structures going down. There are political fronts with different people which are cracked up. And if you ask me today, there are many in parliament who disagree with me, but all the political parties put together in Sri Lanka don't have more than 50% of the voter base supporting them. This is in a country which was highly politicized, and your numbers could go up to even 70%, leaving 10% to decide your fate. That's what it is. Some are happy at the present economic situation, thinking we are out of the woods. No, we are not out of the crisis that came last year. The economic stabilization is taking place. We get off it when the debt restructuring is done, both the foreign debt and the domestic debt. As the governor will tell you, it won't cause a lot of worries of what will happen with the domestic debt, whether there be another crisis. He will tell you it won't. But we have to go through this phase. Thereafter, we have to decide what's the next step. Where are we going? What are we going to do? We can't go on the same way. We have to repay our debts. We get a longer time. That's one. Secondly, we'll have to keep borrowing again because the balance of trade is not in our favor. So you come back to the same situation in another 5 to 7 years' time. That's why we've got to, this time, make a genuine effort to ensure that the economy be on a growth path.
Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara assures that sufficient fuel stocks will be available at refueling stations across the island by tomorrow. Taking to Twitter, Minister noted that both the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation and the Lanka Indian Oil Corporation are continuing to distribute fuel island-wide. According to the Minister, CPC is also reviewing data of fuel orders placed and the stocks maintained at all filling stations in the past week. He stated that initial reports have identified that a total of 121 fuel stations had not placed any orders for fuel between the period from May 27th to 31st, while several others had failed to place adequate orders to maintain minimum stocks. While explaining that all CPC fuel stations are required to maintain a minimum stock of 50%, the Energy Minister noted that the license of fuel stations that had violated the terms of their contract will be terminated upon conclusion of the reviewing process. Litro Gas announced a downward revision from midnight tomorrow. Chairman of Litro, Muditha Pires, said the price reduction reflects price fluctuations in the global market and appreciation of the Sri Lankan rupee. The price of a 12.5 kilogram Litro gas cylinder will be reduced by at least 300 rupees from midnight tomorrow.
State gas supplier Litro Gas Lanka Limited has decided to slash prices of its domestic LP gas cylinders with effect from midnight tomorrow. According to Chairman Muditha Pires, the price of a 12.5 kilogram cylinder, which currently stands at 3,638 rupees, is expected to be reduced by about 300 to 350 rupees a cylinder. During the last gas price revision on the midnight of the 3rd of May, the price of a 12.5 kilogram cylinder was reduced by 100 rupees, while the prices of the 5 kilogram and 2.3 kilogram cylinders were reduced by 40 rupees and 19 rupees respectively.
As Litro Gas, we are hoping to reduce the price from this domestic gas cylinder, 12.5, approximately about 3 to 350 rupees from tomorrow midnight. So the proportionately, the other two small gas cylinders will be reduced also. So the official notice of the reduction and exact rupee value will be notified tomorrow morning about 10:30, the official press. The main reason for the reduction is the gas market price fluctuation. And also the recent past we noticed the exchange rate, the rupee against the dollar. So that benefit also we decided to give to the general public as a reduction again. We have enough of stock. We have full stock in Kerala Pitya, then Mabim also we have stock, and also each and every single distributor has enough of stock to issue.
Meanwhile, private sector supplier Laf Gas PLC stated that they expect to revise prices in the near future.
The US Ambassador to Sri Lanka, Julie Chung, reiterates continued support of the United States to Sri Lanka amid these difficult times. During a token giveaway event to distribute a stock of rice among families in Colombo, the ambassador commented on the support provided to Sri Lanka by the United States during the crisis.
A donation of 40 metric tons of rice from the United States with the efforts of the American Alumni Association of Sri Lanka and Sri Lanka's Disaster Management Center were distributed among disadvantaged families in Colombo recently. Selected families in Kalutara and Galle districts are also to benefit from the stock of rice donated by the Bridgeforth Farms in Alabama.
You already know that the U.S. government is a strong partner here in Sri Lanka, and we have provided significant assistance. As the General said, there is much need, and so in the past year, the U.S. has provided over $270 million in new assistance to give fertilizer for over 1 million paddy farmers all around the country, for lunch, school lunches for school children, to help small and medium enterprises get back on their feet. But from fertilizer to farmers to entrepreneurs, I'm very proud of every one of those projects that we're involved in. But what's amazing today is that it's not just a government-to-government relationship we have here. It's the generosity of the American people and of the relationships that we form when we study together, when we do business together, and when we respect one another. I'm very proud of the AAA here, Sri Lankans who went to study abroad in the United States, leaving everything behind, and then coming back home to enrich their fellow countrymen and women, taking the things they learned from the United States, taking the things they learned from Sri Lanka, putting that together, using all their resources and networks to improve the lives of the Sri Lankan people. This is a small portion of what we do and will continue to do between the United States and Sri Lanka.
Chief of Energy Sector Group of the Asian Development Bank, Dr. Priyantha Vijayatunga, points out that Sri Lanka will have to depend on clean energies and therefore reforms should be brought looking at long-term structures for the power industry. The energy sector expert mentioned this while joining a national symposium on power sector reforms organised virtually by the Electrical Engineering Department of the University of Moratuwa.
The National Symposium on Power Sector Reforms was held in Colombo recently.
When we took policy decisions, there was no proper dialogue. They were taken in an ad hoc ways, whims of people, and then implemented, and then found most of them to be wrong. For example, in 1990s, we took a decision not to do coal power plants, but to go for oil power generation. And it is costing us a lot today. And we have got a bunch of oil-based power plants, and we have now other option than buying expensive oil and running them. So when that policy decision took, I think it was silently accepted by all stakeholders, including universities, public, and the players in the power sector. And no one gave an alternative opinion. We should not do this. This will backfire in the future. When these policy decisions were taken, I think academia and others stayed silent. For example, when the government took the decision not to import fertilizer, there was no big outcry from the academia and saying that don't do this. This will kill the economy. That was really bad for the decision makers also. They themselves were in trouble afterwards. Therefore, I think it is right time that when the governments take policy decisions and make structural changes in any sector, academia and the professional organizations make their rational studies and air them in a proper positive way so that the contributions will be received by the decision makers, policy makers, and they will be appropriately accommodated in the structural change processes.
So as far as we are concerned from development financing institutions angle, reforms should enable whatever you consider the reforms you consider at the moment. It should enable increased digitalization. Look at Lanka Electricity Company and CEB when it comes to implementing the latest technologies, latest systems. Why LECO is faster in adapting this? Because its structure, the company, because of its decision-making process and the time taken for that. I'm not saying CEB is bad, but that's what enables this absorption of these new approaches and systems. You should have in the sector a governance structure and structure within the industry which will reduce the dependency on high cost generation. So waiting until the last minute and putting up a generator of high cost would enable that decision making process. As I said, the other is most important is focus on renewable energy and other low cost generation. Whether we like it or not, we have to have a structure to enable adoption, deployment of renewable and energy efficiency technologies. It is already happening elsewhere, and we cannot stop that. And eventually we'll have to depend completely on clean energies, whether we like it or not. We have to keep that in mind when we look at our long-term structure for the industry. And also, it should support decarbonizing other sectors. Look at the transport sector. One of the points raised all the time is that why worry about decarbonizing the power sector when other sectors like transport contribute so much to the emissions? We cannot escape our responsibility just because ours is small in terms of emissions.
Well, tourism arrivals to Sri Lanka lesser during May. However, revenues grow more than 200% as estimated during the month of May. We'll bring you details when we return after this short break.
ගොඩමඩ පෙරලි කරන බලපුළුවන් කාරයා මහින්ද්‍රා යුවෝ ටීමෝ වෙතින්. වැඩම ගොඩයි ගොඩම තමයි. ස්වරාජ් ට්‍රැක්ටර් ටීමෝ වෙතින්.
අබාන්ස් මිඩ්ඩිය මෑඩ්නස් සේල් 50% දක්වා වට්ටම් සමග මාස 24ක් දක්වා පොලි රහිතව ජුනි 20 වනදා දක්වා පමණයි.
Welcome back. We take you to business news, but before that we'll take a look at the latest update on developments locally and internationally. I'll take you to the Poya update today. Buddhist devotees across the country, as every year, marked the full moon day of Poya, commemorating the first sermon by Arahat Mahinda Thera introducing Buddhism to Sri Lanka. In lieu of Poya Day, President Ranil Wickremesinghe issuing a message stated that all citizens must commit to safeguarding Buddhism and preserving the invaluable Buddhist heritage and the Buddhist practices gifted to the nation.
The sacred Poson Poya Day is one of the most significant Buddhist holidays celebrated in Sri Lanka on the full moon day in June. Poson Poya is noteworthy to Sri Lankan Buddhists as the day on which Emperor Asoka's son, Arahat Mahinda Thera, introduced Buddhism to the island in the 3rd century BC. Although Poson is celebrated throughout the island, the major ceremonies are seen in Anuradhapura and in Mihintale. Devotees across the island engage in religious rituals and cultural practices to mark the Poson full moon Poya Day. Concurrently, the Derana Abhivandana program organized by the Derana Media Network in lieu of Poson Poya commenced at the historic Ruwanvali Saya temple in Anuradhapura this morning. Meanwhile, issuing his message for Poson Poya Day, President Ranil Wickremesinghe stated that the profound dialogue on Dhamma and the subsequent socio-cultural and political discussions have paved the way for a self-sustaining economy, particularly in agriculture, irrigation system and sacred monuments. The head of state meanwhile urged all citizens to commit to safeguarding Buddhism and preserving the invaluable Buddhist heritage gifted to the country. In his Poson Poya Day message, Prime Minister Dinesh Gunawardena stated that it is essential to think afar and wide, requesting all to line up for a society that represents noble virtues at every aspect. Meanwhile, opposition leader Sajith Premadasa too issued a message on the day on Poson Poya, stating that Sri Lanka was able to move forward as a proud nation due to the way of life taught in Buddhism brought to the nation by the Mihidu Thero. The opposition leader further stated that it had laid the foundation for a proud history and a bright future.
Taking you to business news, Sri Lanka recorded 83,309 tourists during the month of May. Now, during this month, according to latest statistics of the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority, Sri Lanka's tourism arrivals amounted to 175% increase in the number of tourists compared to May 2022, numbering 30,207. However, this number is a decline of about 22,189 tourists from April last year, which recorded 105,498 arrivals to the island. Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority said 28% of tourists who visited Sri Lanka in May were from India, while Russia followed with the second highest contribution of 9%. Tourist arrivals from Germany and the United Kingdom amounted to 8% and 7% of the total number of tourists that arrived in Sri Lanka last month. Meanwhile, estimated tourism revenue during May grew more than 200% in May compared to a year earlier. It is estimated that tourism revenue for May amounts to $131.5 million compared to $43.5 million in the same month of last year. Now, OPEC and its allies began 2 days of its biannual meetings in Vienna, which may culminate in further production cuts of as much as 1 million barrels per day as the organization faces flagging oil prices and a looming supply glut. Oil prices rose over 2%, with Brent settling at $78.13, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude rose $71.74.
OPEC Plus, which groups the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries and allies led by Russia, pumps around 40% of the world's crude oil, meaning its policy decisions can have a major impact on global oil prices. According to a Reuters report, 3 sources familiar with the matter have revealed that production cuts were being discussed among options for tomorrow's session when OPEC Plus ministers gather in Vienna. The sources had mentioned that the cuts could amount up to 1 million barrels per day, on top of existing cuts of 2 million barrels per day and voluntary cuts of 1.6 million, announced in a surprise move in April, which took effect in May. If approved, the latest decision would take the total volume of reductions to 4.66 million barrels per day, or around 4.5% of the global demand. Western nations meanwhile accused OPEC of manipulating oil prices and undermining the global economy through high energy costs. The West has also accused OPEC of siding too much with Russia, despite Western sanctions over Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. In response, OPEC officials have said the West's money printing over the last decade has driven inflation and forced oil-producing nations to act to maintain the value of their main export. Asian countries such as China and India have bought the majority of Russian oil exports and refused to join the Western sanctions on Russia.
Tragic strikes as India's Odisha states reports the deadliest railway crash in over 2 decades. We'll bring you details when we return after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. In international news, at least 280 people have died after 3 trains were involved in a horrific crash in the eastern Indian state of Odisha as rescuers raced against time to pull survivors from the wreckage. Officials claim that an estimated 1,000 people are left injured in what is one of India's deadliest accidents in over 2 decades. Odisha declared today a day of state mourning as a mark of respect to the victims.
The collision occurred at about 7 p.m. local time yesterday, and it is believed that several carriages from the Coromandel Express, which runs from Kolkata to Chennai, derailed, with some of them ending up on the opposite track. Another train, the Howrah Superfast Express travelling from Bengaluru to Howrah, is then thought to have hit the overturned carriages. Indian officials say a freight train which was stationary at the site was also involved in the incident. The accident saw one train ram into another, that carriages were lifted high into the air, twisting and then smashing off the tracks. Another carriage had been tossed entirely onto its roof, crushing the passenger section. However, authorities have provided conflicting accounts on which train derailed first to become entangled with the other, and are yet to make any statements about possible causes. Video footage showed derailed train coaches and damaged tracks, with rescue teams searching the carriages for survivors. According to foreign media reports, an extensive search and rescue operation has been mounted, involving hundreds of fire department personnel and police officers, as well as sniffer dogs. More than 200 ambulances and hundreds of doctors, nurses and rescue personnel were also mobilized at the scene. According to current estimates by Indian authorities, nearly 300 people have been killed, while thousands are injured in the horrific crash. But the death toll is expected to rise further.
And that wraps up tonight's edition of First at 9. Thank you for watching. Good night.